Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, Patrick and I went into town the other day and we went to the Costco, and I was really pleased to see that they had organic peaches for a pretty good price. So we bought 30 pounds of peaches because every year I try to can up at least 7 jars of peaches. I'm actually have peaches back there from 2017 and then all the peaches from 2018 and 2019 that I canned up. So usually, since I tend to stay pretty far ahead, I only will do most often one batch. Sometimes I'll do 2 so I can have up to 14, but I don't have space for more than 7 back there, so 7 it is this time. So the rest of the peaches I use for other things. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about how I can the peaches. One of the reasons I don't do a lot of videos on canning is because when I'm canning a lot of stuff, I do not like having the equipment in my way. So it's easier for me to take little clips and still shots and stuff and just talk about it in another video. So I do hope this is helpful. So anyway, I'm going to talk about canning peaches plus some of the other things that I'm doing with my peaches this year. And so first let's talk about this. Now when it comes to canning fruits in particular, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can do the raw pack or you can do the hot pack. So I always do raw pack because it's quick and simple and I can just get it done. And because my time is so precious right now, I just don't want to take the extra step of actually cooking the peaches. But I do still make a hot syrup that I put in there. Now, those of you who are new to canning may wonder, well, what if it's quicker to do a raw pack, why would people bother doing the hot pack? Well, that is because when you actually cook the peaches a little bit first and then put them in your jar, you're not going to see this happen. The peaches are going to fill up the jar completely. Now, when you're packing the raw peaches in there, you can pack them in there tight and they'll look packed all the way down to the bottom. But once you can them and they cook in the canner, they tend to float up to the top. They have a lot of air bubbles in them, and sometimes that can cause issues. You can't get all the air bubbles out when you do it this way. So a lot of times a lot of the liquid gets pushed out through the top of the jar during the canning process. So you won't end up with as full of jars. So that is one of the drawbacks. But to me, it's worth it to do it this way because of my time being more precious. Space is precious, yes, but this amount of peaches in one jar is plenty anyway if you're talking quart jars. So they each have their own benefits, and if you want it to look really nice in the jar and to fill up the jar better and have less issues with air bubbles, then doing a hot pack method where you cook the peaches a little bit first is best. But when time is of the essence, then the raw pack is best. So here is how I do it, because I have uses for the peels. Instead of scalding the peaches, which is what I used to do, so that you can peel just the outside layer of skin off before you cut it up, because I use the skins for many other things, I don't worry about there being some of the flesh attached to the skin. So what I do is first I quarter up the peaches, then I cut them into 8ths, and then I will peel off the skin. So just using a knife and cut it up. Now the skins can be used for many things. You can dehydrate them up. I recommend if you do that to use as a snack, sprinkle just a little bit of some kind of sweetener over it before you put it on your dehydrator. Because the skin itself doesn't have as much flavor as the flesh anyway, and adding that little bit of sugar can help bring out the flavor. Now I did that one year and it was so-so. I decided I wasn't going to do it again. So this year, what I did, besides starting a couple batches of peach vinegar, so I'll use the peach peels and the pits for making peach vinegar. But since I still have peach vinegar from last year, I decided I'm only going to do a couple of half-gallon jars for the vinegar, and then the rest of the peels I use to make a butter. But I'll get to that in a minute. Let's finish talking about the canning method. So once I pack my quart jars, I like to do quarts, you can do pints too, but once I pack it, the slices in there nice and tight, I then, for the peaches in particular, I like to add about up to a tablespoon of my homemade vanilla extract, and then over that I will pour my very light syrup. And so my syrup is approximately a 1/4 cup of sugar per cup of water, maybe a little bit less than that. And you can use whatever sugar you want. That's just to help add a little bit of flavor to it. And so then that I do pour in there hot. So I just cook it on a low heat just to get that sugar dissolved in there. That's all you got to do. You don't have to cook it down. And then I pour that over the peaches, making sure then that I take either a chopstick, or what I prefer for this is a silicone spatula, a small one, nice and flat. They stick in there and work out as many of the air bubbles as you can. This is important no matter what it is you're canning, even when you're doing the raw pack method. In fact, especially when you're doing the raw pack method, you want to try to get as much air bubbles out as you can. And I'll even kind of squish the peaches down a little bit too, to make sure I'm working up as much of the bubbles as I can. Let me talk about the lids. You can see I use the Tatler lids on this. So I did a little video clip here showing how I put the lids on. You put the rubber ring on the lid, put the lid on the jar, then take your band and put that on there, and only turn it until that jar starts to turn freely on its own. You don't take both hands and crank it down tight like you would a metal lid. You just don't even bother holding the jar with the other hand. Just put it on this way, and that will be just the right tightness when you're talking about any Tatler lids. That includes the new model. That's where I was wrong about those Tatler lids. The new lids they've come out with, that's called Easy Seal. Initially they were supposed to be without, where you used them the same way as a metal lid. Nope, you use them the same way you do the old Tatler lids. So no matter which Tatlers you have, the method is the same. And that means when you're using the Tatlers, when you pull it out of the canner after the process, give it a couple minutes to finish venting, and then you take your UV gloves or some couple of towels and you tighten that band down the rest of the way after it comes out of the canner, and then until they cool off. So anyway, I make sure the water is at least a little bit warm, since the liquid going in there is hot. So, but the peaches are cold, so that's going to be kind of bring it to a warm temperature. I like the water to match the temperature of the jars pretty closely when I put them in there, so I don't have any risk of breaking. So I put hot water from the tap into the canner, make sure I got an inch above the top of the jars, and then I bring it to the boil. Once the water is boiling at a full boil, then I start my timer. So for quart jars, that is 30 minutes that you're going to boil it. After 30 minutes, turn it off, remove the jars. Once I get all the jars out, then I start from the first jar that I took out and then go and tighten the bands. Now, if you're using metal lids, that last step is not necessary at all. You simply tighten it down like you normally would and put it in your canner, and then take it out when it's done. And yes, you do kind of miss the pleasant sound of hearing the jars, the lids ping when you're using Tatlers, but I love the fact that they are reusable. So I have certain things I use my Tatler lids for, and peaches is one of them. Peaches, tomatoes, that kind of stuff. When I'm doing any kind of jam or syrup, I still like to use the metal lids for that, just because I'm only going to process it for 10 minutes. And I haven't experimented yet with the Tatler lids to see if that's something that I feel comfortable doing this with. I use stuff that I'm going to process for a longer period of time. I don't mind using the Tatlers, but for such a short processing time like I did here, I want to stick with the metal. So, and I'm sure the Tatlers would work fine. I just haven't tried it yet. Oh, by the way, if you've done your jams with the Tatler lids, go ahead and share down below and let us know how well that works for you. So what I did this year, this was actually an experiment just to try it, because I have a lot of vinegar, peach vinegar from last year I haven't worked through yet. And so I only decided to get 2 jars of the vinegar going. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my recipe here, but keep in mind that whenever I'm making stuff up like this on the fly, I don't usually keep exact figures. I did try to mentally in this just so I could share with you what I did. But anyway, here's what I did, was I took the peach peels and threw them in the blender. And once I got enough in there, I processed it up, and I did that until I had my pan full. The amount of sugar I used was about 1 cup of sugar to every 4 cups of the fruit puree. I also added in some fresh rhubarb from the garden to add more flavor, because sometimes peaches, when you go to can them or go to make a jam out of them, the flavor isn't really intense. So adding something like rhubarb, I used a total of 3 stalks in there, will help add a little bit of tartness, kind of like you would do with lemon juice, except I can grow rhubarb. I can't grow lemons very well. So rhubarb it is, and it adds a really nice flavor. The other thing I did with this was for the sugar, about half of the sugar I used in here was actually jaggery, because I wanted to try that for the flavor, and the other half was just regular organic blonde cane sugar. And so that turned out pretty good. It turned out real tasty. And the other thing I did with this is I also added some vanilla extract, again, just to give it a little bit more flavor, just like I do with the canned peaches. Then what I did with the peach rhubarb vanilla butter is I just cooked it down, not halfway down. I thought about doing that, but I decided just to go down to 3/4 of the amount. It's still a little bit on the runny side, so maybe a little bit, you could still put it on toast. But I wasn't concerned, because I have lots of apple butters and lots of jams from previous years, that I didn't mind if this turned into more of a syrup, because we tend to use stuff like that more as a topping on pancakes and on ice cream, and or even in yogurt. So this will be good in any of that kind of stuff. So anyway, just cook it down, and then you put it in your jars. I like to heat the jars up so they're hot first. You don't want to put a hot ingredient like a jam or a butter into a cold jar, or you will break your jar. So I heat the jars up first, then I pour the hot liquid in there, make sure I clean off the rim, put on the lid and the band, put it in the canner just like I did with these, making sure the water level is at least an inch above the jars, and that the water is hot going in there, since everything going in there is hot. You don't want to put it in cold water. And then bring it to a boil and process for 10 minutes. The same thing, when it's done, just take it out. Now you can see a picture here where I've got the peaches and the butter all sitting out on the deck, cooling down after I can them. And then what I do is I wash all the jars up really good. Once I checked them all to make sure they're sealed well, which all of them did seal. Then I wash them up real good, taking the bands off of all of them. Now, because of where these are going, I'm not going to be putting the bands back on. Yes, I know technically you're not supposed to ever put the bands or leave the bands on. That's the thing. Don't leave your bands on. You can put them back on, and I'll explain that in a minute. But if you're going to do that, you need to wash up your bands, wash up the rim of the jar really well. One of the reasons you don't just leave bands on jars, or like if something like peaches or this, it's going to cause a sticky residue to build up under the band when it's canning, and that can make it become like glue and make it almost impossible to get off. When you go to open it. The other thing is that moisture in there can cause the inside of the bands to rust, and then rust to the jar, and again make it almost impossible to get off, maybe impossible altogether. So that is why when I wash up my bands, if I'm going to put them back on my jars, I make sure the jar and the band is fully dry. So for the peaches, because they're going to go on the bottom row and the older peaches are going to be going on top, no, I don't stack them directly on top of each other. What I do is I put the band on very loosely, just so it's almost just barely sitting on there. And of course, making sure you don't ever pick it up by the band, because it's going to slip off and you're going to drop your jar. It just sits on there loosely to provide just a little bit of extra protection there, and where not so much weight is going directly on the lid. And then you can put a layer of thin board or cardboard on top, which is what I do. I have both. In some places I have boards that Patrick cut for me, and then those lay on top of the jars, and then that way all the weight gets dispersed evenly. And then of course, with a lot of it going on the band, then the weight pushes down onto the glass threading rather than directly on the lid itself. So that will prevent causing any seal breakages. Now, a couple other things you can do with your peaches besides making the vinegar, besides canning them, besides making some kind of peach jam or butter, and of course making desserts. We're talking about preserving here, but you can make peach cobblers and peach pies. One of the things I did do for a treat for Patrick though is I made him some peach creamsicles, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll make a huge batch. I'll fill up the Popsicle molds, which the ones I have now aren't, I don't think they're currently available, but I'll put a link down below to some various different molds. I'll just do a search so you can look at. Zoku is the brand I use, but I also recommend checking out, if you can afford it, the stainless steel molds. Those are the ones I'd really like to get someday, but they are a lot more expensive. But anyway, you can check out those ones that I'll link down below. So I'll fill up those, and then if I still have extra, which often I do, then I'll put them in the little half-pint canning jars, the little short ones, so then Patrick will just eat it out of there with a spoon. So what I did with that, I know people ask me on my this and that video I put out about the orange creamsicles, well, where's the recipe? Well, the recipe was in the video, because I don't use measurements, so I can't really tell you, and it really has to be up to your taste. I just throw a bunch of fruit in the blender. I add some either half and half or whipping cream, depending on what I'm putting in there and how rich I want to make it, and put in some kind of sweetener to taste. I've been using the jaggery quite a bit in that, and again, I just add it until I get the flavor right, the way I want it. So I can't tell you exact measurements. If you just follow that same simple idea, put your fruit in, put your whatever kind of milk. Yes, it can be nut milk of any kind. I have recipes out there on how to make your own nut milks of all different varieties. I've made so many different kinds, whatever your favorite is, whether it be coconut, almond, Brazil nut, pecan, whatever, cashew. They are all good, and I like making blends quite a bit. And they will work just great in making the creamsicles. So yes, if you're vegan or you prefer nut milks over dairy milks, you can go that way. So anyway, you just put it in there and then add your other ingredients to taste. Now, if you're going with a nut milk and you want to get it a little more rich, I recommend throwing in some coconut oil. That would be a good option too. Just taste it periodically and then add more of other things as is needed. And yes, in that one, in the peach ones, I did also add some vanilla extract to that too. And I put up to a tablespoon of the homemade vanilla extract. And yes, I have all kinds of extract making videos. My favorite way to make most of my extracts is with my homemade wine and raw honey. And the vanilla is a little bit different. I'm going to link down below to the last video I did about extract making, so you can check that out. But please go check out some of my other extract videos just so you can get some more ideas of different types of extracts that you can make. So anyway, yeah, you can use any of those in making your creamsicles. And of course, don't forget, you can also dehydrate up your peaches. I have 2 jars sitting here, pints of, there's probably about 4 of this size peach in every one of these jars. I still have more trays out there dehydrating because the peaches are taking a couple of days. I unplug my dehydrators in the evening because they are running off my solar power. And obviously during the night, we're not collecting solar power, so I don't want it draining out the batteries, because I want to make sure the battery bank is still full enough for me to get breakfast going or coffee going in the morning before the sun hits the solar panels. But you can run your dehydrators at night if you're going off regular electricity. So anyway, yes, don't forget, all I did was I sliced these up thinly, laid them on my trays, and yes, I use the fabric liners or covers, whatever you want to call it, and that was my first time trying it with peaches. I wasn't sure how hard it was going to be, but I just went for it and did all trays, and I was very pleased with how easily they peeled right off the fabric, and then was able to put them in the jars, so that way that just makes it cleaner. And then you just take those fabric liners and just throw them in the wash. It's so much easier than having to care for the trays themselves, and you're getting away from so much of that plastic exposure. Oh yes, I wanted to say One of the things, especially when you're talking about something like this, where you can see there's a lot of liquid in there. One of the things that you can do with your liquid, besides turning it, cooking it down and making a thicker syrup out of it, maybe adding a little bit more sugar if you're wanting to make it like a pancake syrup. One thing I like to do with the liquid that I strain off of my fruit is to add some of my fermentation starter and turn it into a natural soda. It'll be a little thicker than some of the other sodas, but it's so good. And that fermentation process eats through some of that sugar and just makes it a little bit more healthy. Plus gives it that wonderful fizziness that we really like, especially in the hot months. And it's all natural. So that's one of the things you can do with the liquids from your different fruits. Now there's a zillion and one other things you can do with your peaches. Like your dried peaches, you could try to powder them up and use them for flavorings in hot cereals and different things like that. I like to just snack on them like this. You can cut some of them up into smaller little pieces and use them to make a fermentation starter for making sodas, and I have a video on that, on how to make fermentation starters. I'll link down below, and I also have videos on how to make homemade sodas using that. So there's just a couple more ideas. All right, so now it's your turn to put your ideas down below, what you like to do with your peaches, so that everyone can learn from you as well, especially if they've got a lot of peaches to work through and they're just needing some more ideas because they don't want any more canned peaches or butters or jams or pies or cobblers. All right, well, I do hope you found this video helpful and it gave you some ideas. Don't forget to read the comments down below and to check out the links in the description box. Click on show more or that little gray arrow. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.